Welcome. My name is Kyun. I'm an Associate Director at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, working in the Green Economy and Climate Action team. I'm delighted to be hosting today's event on Ukraine's NDC roadmap, the way to decarbonize the economy and make it climate resilient. I have distinguished a group of speakers and panelists today here at the MDB Pavilion. We have Iryna Stavchuk, a Deputy Minister of Ministry of Environment, Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine for European integration. We have Dmytro Luka, a parliamentarian and chairman of the Economic Affairs of Parliamentary Committee. We have Alessia Vasilenko, environmental parliamentarian for the Environmental Policy and Nature Management Committee. And virtually we are joined by Deputy Minister of Energy, Yaroslav Demchenkov. And also we have Head of Climate Finance and Carbon Markets at the EBRD, Mr. Jan Willem van de Ven. And Ms. Hannah Mosley, Policy Officer of BMU at Germany. We also have two speakers to do the closing today. We have Mr. Alexander Stavchuk, Lead Senior Researcher at the Institute of Economic Forecasting, National Academy of Science, and Romeo Bertolini, for Deputy Country Engagement at the NDC Partnership. Thank you very much for joining. So Ukraine has been making strides in enhancing its climate ambition. It has submitted its revised NDC at the end of July this year, committing to greenhouse gas emissions reductions of 65% compared to the 1990s level. It is also committed to carbon neutrality by 2060. This event, we would like to really discuss and focus on, what does the new NDC mean for Ukraine, and what are the implementation challenges? What are the solutions, and what kind of support is needed in order to implement and achieve its NDC target? The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has been supporting the government of Ukraine with updating its NDC for the past 2 years. We've been working with the local Institute of Economic Forecasting and National Academy of Science in providing the technical analysis and supporting the whole extensive process of stakeholder engagement. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Deputy Minister Iryna Stavchuk to present briefly on the recent NDC. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunga, and I kindly ask to put on the presentation. Thank you very much. So I will start with overall context of our country. So Ukraine, after 1990, after collapse of the Soviet Union, the greenhouse gas emissions reduced drastically. And from the slide, you can see that's a link of GDP and greenhouse gas emissions. So from late 90s till 2008, before the financial crisis, there is actually decoupling of GDP growth, which was going up substantially, and greenhouse gas emissions, which actually were not. And these are the reasons for overall economy restructuring, so different types of economies, but also due to the huge potential and energy efficiency measures which were happening. But afterwards, we see kind of waves of still strong correlation between greenhouse gas emissions and our GDP. And with financial crisis, and then later with the situation and the occupation of Ukrainian territories and war which is still happening in Ukraine, the country is struggling to develop and struggling to overcome all those difficulties. We also see a major development of renewable energy over the past years, and Ukraine managed to increase it from almost 8 till 12%. There are still struggles with huge energy poverty, which actually puts us on a very difficult situation how to move forward much stronger carbon pricing and other issues, because not many people can actually even afford not paying full tariffs for the electricity and heat. So we have huge opportunities that we see in emission reductions, but this is also not a very easy way forward. In the process of NDC development, together with Ukrainian Institute and with experts from EBRD, we developed several scenarios, and that was a process of very comprehensive calculations of all sectors of economy, with the main goal to understand where do we have the main potential for emission reductions, where is it cheaper to deliver, and what our priorities as a government should be, and finally what our fair and ambitious target could be. And after calculations, after a set of huge and very difficult discussions with different sectors, we came with a target which was approved by the government, which is minus 65% from 1990 levels, and reaching to climate neutrality by 2060. There are questions sometimes that the reduction of emissions in Ukraine by 2035, by 2030 is quite modest from the current levels. But we believe that it's both fair and ambitious target, because we still assume that the economy of Ukraine actually has to develop, and especially if the territories on the east of Ukraine would be deoccupied, so that there has to be a space for development. At the same time, we also have stronger vision for decarbonization of key sectors of economy. So basically our NDC target covers all the sectors. In the energy sector, it has to be phasing out of coal power plants and substitution with renewables and with new balancing capacities. In the industry sector, we foresee massive modernization, which has to happen, especially with, we hope, implementation of EU emission industrial directive. There has to be a lot being developed in the building sector, where we also see huge potential, and it's economically feasible, but it's very challenging to implement because it also links to culture, where people are not used to get together, get bank loans, and to do energy efficiency measures. Then we have transport sector, agricultural sector, forestry, waste management. So basically, it's about the whole economy transformation. The financial part is actually core of all NDC and of success of its implementation. We calculated that Ukraine by 2030 needs around 100 billion to implement all those measures and transformations. And it's quite a large amount of funds, because just to give a comparison, in 1990, the overall capital investments in Ukraine were like on the level of 20 billion. If we talk about NDC, it means that half of capital investments have to go for green transformation, which has to be developed. So the development of correct internal financial system, but also engagement with international partners and attracting international climate finance is key for our NDC to be implemented. We are moving forward. We are working on the very concrete action plan, which will include all the key transformations which have to be introduced. We are working on development of financial strategy and overall climate governance architecture. We also introduced monitoring, reporting, and verification system, quite similar, actually the same as EU ETS system requires, and looking forward to establishment of emission trading system in several years. So I stop here and would be ready to engage in further discussions.
Thank you very much, Iryna. So I'd like to kickstart with questions to the parliamentarians in the room. From the perspectives of economic policy and environmental policy, what has been the process like in building government consensus on raising climate ambition, and what were some of the challenges that you faced, and what were the effective kind of ways of overcoming these challenges? Dimitrij, would you like to start?
So for us, as the Committee for Economic Development, of course, the major issue is still industry, because industry, as you well know, is one of the major polluters worldwide. But again, it's one of the most frivolous players in economic growth. So we had to find a balance, and we were digging for a way to do it. And basically the question that we were posing has been answered by the EU and the industrial program that has been revised somehow by the Ukrainian authorities after the COVID has struck. So, of course, obviously, the COVID has disrupted a lot of supply chains. It has created shortages of the products, of some critical products for the business and for the citizens. It caused a lack of predictability. We suffered, and everybody suffered, border closures and stuff like that. And this led the European Commission, for instance, to advocate such a thing as an open, autonomous strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy for the European single market, meaning that they will focus on reducing the dependencies on some products that have been supplied before the COVID from third countries and rely majorly upon their single market. And they will focus on the circular economy, meaning that they will try to develop more and more local producers so that they reduce this, also the carbon imprint produced by the supply chains from the third countries, and they basically will reduce the cost of it all. So we decided to take the very similar path, and with such laws as the localization law, which requires at least 1% of the goods that Ukraine buys or sources from the overseas or outside of its territory to be produced in Ukraine for at least 30%. For instance, industrial parks that we have adopted quite recently gets perfectly in line with the EU's directive on the industrial alliances. And what they do is they promote the industrial alliances in order not to disperse, all these efforts and not to create additional carbon imprint. So what they want the countries to do is to focus and to narrow down the industrial activities. And we get perfectly in line with that, and what we will be advocating next is the eco-friendly industrial parks. And one of the requirements for the companies or the businesses to be opened within this territory that provides tax exemption, for example, and other stimuluses, is to provide for the Minister of Economy some kind of criteria that clearly show that you are going to meet carbon-friendly aims as a business in your operations. So this is like the plan. This is the way that we are thinking to go as a committee, and basically to get in line with the industrial policy of the European Union 2020, and of course with the Green Deal strategy.
Thank you very much. Lucia.
Right, so sometimes it actually feels that the Economic Development Committee in Parliament is more environmental than the Environmental Committee itself. And I represent the Environmental Committee, and I'm also the chair of the Special Subcommittee on Climate Change. So when we talk about NDCs, and we actually had this discussion in our subcommittee just before the COP kicked off, we discussed the fact that, and it's an undeniable fact, that the NDC that was adopted by the government is one which is ambitious. And the government agrees on that, obviously. Then business complains about that, which also is a good sign, saying that it's ambitious. But also the NGOs and the opposition in Parliament also agree on that. And that's a good sign, saying that we did adopt an ambitious aim for Ukraine. The question is, how do we go about implementing it? And how do we make what's written on paper a reality? So the very recent kind of roundtable discussion, let's call it that we have had in our subcommittee was with the representatives of government. And I'm actually pleased to see some of them in this panel this morning. And as government institutions such as the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Economics, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Agriculture, Transport are all preparing their detailed action plans as to how they're going to go about implementing the NDC, they all have one question. There's a very concrete phrase in the NDC that its implementations and its success depends largely on having external financial support. Because the numbers that Iryna mentioned, and that come up to over 100 billion euros over the next 5 years, are big. It's a big investment that cannot be produced inside the country alone. So we will largely need the support of our counterparts in the international financial markets, also in our bilateral relations. And what we as a country are looking for is not just assistance in the traditional form of grants and things. It's not that. Actually, what Ukraine has on offer and what the NDC has on offer is a partnership for building back better after COVID, for building back better for the sake of our future generations and for the sake of combating climate change. And the way that we can do it in so many different sectors. And Parliament actually plays a crucial role here. So Dmytro already mentioned a couple of initiatives that are in place in the economic sector and the Economic Development Committee, industrial parks being one, localization being another. But then if we look at the Environmental Committee, we have a bit more difficulty in pushing forward with our reforms, because our reforms generally mean a lot of change that businesses have to undergo. So for example, we have the draft law on industrial pollution reduction. It's a major law which targets all types of businesses, from transport to agriculture to any kind of industrial plants, power plants, etc. It means a lot of change. It means that the pollution and also the emissions will get reduced, and that the supply and production chains would need to change. There's a difficulty with passing this law in Parliament, but we're working on it. But essentially what it means for our partners in terms of attracting investment, it means that the market will grow, because that law entails that new technology will need to be applied, that best available technology will need to come into Ukraine. This technology will need to be built, be produced in Ukraine, and also there's great room for scientific research and development. This is another area where cooperations can be built, and this is another area for investments to be drawn in Ukraine in this climate change sector and in the greening of the economy and of society as a whole. Another package of legislation which we are looking at in the Environmental Committee is the forestry legislation. So the government does their part. They are supposed to adopt very soon a reformed strategy on forestry, but in Parliament we have a whole set of laws directing at reforestation. And this is very interesting also for investors again, because if we take a step back from the traditional way in which we look at forests, but it's also a great investment opportunity for people who want to invest in tourism, who want to develop national parks, who want to do, again, research and development in biodiversity spheres. Something else we're doing in our committee is also directed at reducing air pollution. So there's another set of legislation directed at that. And again, we come at opportunities to do partnerships. A final thing, it's not anymore about the Environmental Committee, it's more about other committees and the law which has already been passed, but the land reform. The land reform has been supported by many international financial institutions in Ukraine. All our partners in the EU and otherwise have waited a long time. Ukrainians have waited a long time for the land reform to be passed. Essentially what it means is that agricultural land can go into private hands. And Ukraine is an agricultural country. But it's the task now of the government and of Parliament, and actually of all the investors who are coming in from abroad, but also internal investors, to make sure that this reform is green, meaning that we provide enough support for the development of green agriculture, for the development of small, environmentally safe family businesses. And that's something that both our committees have to work on.
And essentially, this partnership that I have put up for discussion now, it should be strengthened inside the country, inside the parliament, with the different committees working together, and also with the committees working with the government. And then we take it a step further, and then we bring in all the counterparts who are interested to coming in and investing in Ukraine, not just providing blatant support as it is usually viewed.
Thank you very much. I mean, it sounds like a lot of discussion is happening, very active, discussions within the parliament. Moving on to our deputy ministers, I'll start off with Yaroslav. The ministries are responsible for implementing many of these actions under the NDC. What are some of the actions that you're already taking, and what are the implementing challenges from the aspects of the ministries?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the previous speakers for their important messages on the key issues we are facing. Let me also outline some of the challenges that we are present in Ukraine's energy sector today. Our main goal is, as the Ministry of Energy, remains in ensuring reliable energy supply for our citizens. We work to make sure that people have heating and electricity in their homes, at the same time that this energy is affordable, sustainable, and clean. In this, our first challenge is a massive amount of effort that we must undertake to achieve the goal that Ukraine has set for itself by making quite ambitious commitment in Europe to reduce carbon emissions. At present, 70% of electricity in Ukraine is generated from sources that do not leave a carbon footprint. We realize that Ukraine is not escaping global trends, so the consumption of electricity in the country will continue to grow. And it is important to ensure that this increase in consumption is covered by the generation that doesn't leave a carbon footprint. Today, we still have a big challenge that during peak load hours, the difference is still covered by mainly coal-fired generation. That's why when we are implementing coal phase out even the next 10 to 15 years, we must decarbonize our energy sector and put in place new flexible generation assets, energy storages, and work on increasing energy efficiency. Ukraine will be implementing these tasks by integrating our energy market into the European markets, by opening up our energy industry to welcome affordable funding and implementing our projects by international investors. In this context, it is very important for us to complete synchronization with the European energy system in 2023. We will improve balancing in the region and facilitate the synchronization of the Baltic states with the NSOE network. This will also allow energy exchange and enable import of low carbon electricity from Ukraine to the EU countries. As a result, the country will virtually remain the only major source of electricity in the region. Energy efficiency must become truly priority. When thinking of increasing power generation, we must be mindful of energy conservation and its efficient use. It takes a lot of work by the government, business to affect consumers' behavior. We accept that going forward, that principle of energy efficiency first must become our fundamental in state policy. And to finish my remarks, I should mention a challenge at another nature. This is a large portion of Ukraine's energy assets that are located in the territory that is currently outside of our control. Historically, the eastern part of our country, which is now occupied by Russia, has been the largest concentration of coal mines whose physical condition these days is poor, even critical. We have no control over these assets. As a result, there is a huge negative impact on the environment, as without proper procedure of closure and post-closure care, these coal mines are a source of pollution to soil, water, and other. Next, same as in all other countries, a firm foundation of green transition is proper communication with the civil society. And we believe when speaking of green transition, of coal phase out, it is very important to deliver just transition to the mining region and nudge the public towards choosing green energy and moving away from primarily energy sources that are big pollutant. As regards actions, we are now undertaking, the Ministry of Energy is revising our national energy strategy until 2050 to align it with the principles of the European Green Deal. We are also drafting the integrated national energy and climate plan. It will include a clean strategy of coal phase out with renewables, solar, wind, bioenergy, and nuclear generation, displacing thermal generation. Ukraine has the political will to carry out a green transition, and it is essential that in this we have support from the EU and the United States. We will manage to reduce negative climate consequences only through a joint efforts by the countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Deputy Minister Stavchuk from the perspectives of Ministry of Environment. What are you've already mentioned a few, but what are the concrete actions that you're taking, and what are the implementation challenges that you're facing?
So we started to work, so when we were modeling NDC, it was more from the top-down perspective, when we really seen the potential of sectors and where the key transformations have to happen. Now, when we have identified these key transformations with the ministries, we are working on very detailed list of activities. How do we do it? So it's a set of regulatory mechanisms, it's a set of economic instruments, and overall financial strategy, how we do it. Because for any transformation, you might need a different sets of these policy instruments, how we make sure it really is implemented. Financial part is huge, and actually, working on climate and working with current financial system in the world, it's actually everything has to be adjusted, from the taking of the budget of the national and local budget to understand how we do green about it, and actually understanding the full picture, to implementation of the mechanisms which allow us to have green bonds, and implementation of the projects in that direction, cooperation with IFIs, cooperation with private investments, and making sure that actually investments come to Ukraine. We were also planning and thinking about development of the financial instrument or mechanism, or we now call it Climate Investment Fund, Ukrainian Climate Investment Fund, which has to take the environmental taxes which are collected now and the carbon tax, and use these resources to actually support transformations. And we are seeking for the best way how to organize it, and for the best experiences in the world, what is the best approach. We are also working on the overall climate architecture, because as you understand, climate takes all the sectors of economy. So it is from energy to the waste management, and it really has to be properly coordinated. And in that directive, we are developing the framework climate law, the similar ones which are already in some European countries, to put the elements of this overall coordination, monitoring of the results, and taking actions if we are not on track.
Thank you very much. So I think we talked a lot about finance, and I think this is a good segue to ask Jan Willem van der Van, as working in the field of climate finance, what is the overall landscape of the evolving landscape of climate finance and its link with the NDC implementation?
Thank you, Sunga. And I also want to include markets in that. So I think we plan to work now further to the NDC with Ukraine on a climate finance strategy as to how to, what kind of financing mechanisms, instruments can and would be used to implement the NDC. One of the first things, and it was already mentioned, is the so-called carbon tax, and possibly an acceleration as to the development of an emissions trading scheme. It's very important to make sure in the economy that there's a good differentiation between the green technologies and the technologies that emit carbon emissions. And at the moment, Ukraine already has a carbon tax, but it's quite low compared to the high prices in the EU. So we have to see how these prices can be increased. Such would increase basically the fiscal capacity of Ukraine itself as to implementing measures. And these fiscal proceeds would then be leveraged in an efficient manner by financial parties, which can be local banks, can be international financing bodies like EBRD. So I think that's important because I hear the notion that everything will be depending, so to say, on the access to international finance and support. But one also needs to look at what can Ukraine do itself in the first place, and then I think there's an additional bit that can be supported by international donors and parties. The other element is, of course, to enable companies, investors, continued access to international capital markets. And here, elements like the climate governance for such corporations will be very important. So financial institutions will require more information on how companies prepare themselves to become net zero and to become climate resilient. This type of information, which comes through, let's say, streams like the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, will be very important. And here the EBRDs would stand ready to support companies in, let's say, improving their climate governance, so that we are sure that these companies in due time will indeed be net zero and they herewith contribute to the NDC. So there's a lot of work to be done. It's also very important on the assumption that pure fiscal means will be limited, not only in Ukraine, but also globally. It's also very important that we look at the effectiveness and the efficiency of the instruments. So we should develop instruments that are least concessional, meaning that with a little bit of public money, we are able to leverage the private sector utmost in order to deliver on the climate objectives, the NDC. And importantly, I want to mention also the long-term strategy is an even more important document, because it will lay out how Ukraine will achieve its net zero ambition in, I understand, in 2060. would like to leave it over to you, Suna.
Thank you very much, Jan Willem. I would like to bring in Ms. Hannah Mosley. Germany is a big bilateral donor and is supporting countries in their NDC implementation. So I would like to ask you, how does the enhanced NDC help international community to support its and finance its implementation?
Thank you very much, Suna. Thanks for being here, and also thanks, of course, EBRD for organizing this important and very interesting event here. Yeah, first of all, of course, I want to congratulate Ukraine on an ambitious revised NDC, as well as for the goal of reaching climate neutrality latest by 2060. I think that this is a great step in order to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. So in order to transition to a climate neutral economy, I think that two things are needed in this process. First of all, it's of course massive political efforts. And secondly, as already has been stated by several panelists here today, the mobilization of considerable financial resources. At the political level, we need economic strategies that are consistent with the global climate targets. And I think here Ukraine has made a substantial step forward with its revised NDC. However, the most important challenge now will be actually tackling the needed means for financing the revised NDC. And as already has been stated, the investment needs to implement the revised NDC is more than 100 billion euros until 2030. And I think that here the enhanced NDC offers, of course, a clear roadmap and shows clear intentions to the international community, but also for investors and the companies that are actually looking for profitable investments and how to invest in climate resilient infrastructure and assets. So climate finance, international climate finance, of course, plays a critical role in supporting countries to address climate change and to finance their NDCs. And I think one of the main issues that are, of course, discussed at the moment at COP26 in Glasgow is the design of market mechanisms that allow the decarbonization of the global economy to be advanced more quickly and more efficiently through international cooperation. And this would allow implementing projects where the benefits are actually particularly great. And this could be a great option as well for Ukraine to actually finance the transition. However, as already has been stated, of course, by Jan Willem, even though international finance can and will play an important role, it can only have a supportive role, hence a catalytic role. So only by mobilizing really substantial investments actually from the private sector, we will be able to achieve our ambitious climate goals and targets. So it is up to the governments to actually create the proper framework and incentives to for the private sector to invest. So let me just give you two examples here. I think the first one has already been stated, of course, by Deputy Minister Stavchuk and also by Jan Willem, that behavior that harms the climate has to become more expensive. And one element and the most important element here is, of course, to put a price on CO2 emissions, whether through taxes, charges, or emission trading system. And I mean, the current CO2 tax in Ukraine has to be, of course, significantly increased in order to have an intended steering effect. I think at the moment, we are around about 10 hryvnia per ton. So this has to be increased in the years to come. And by putting actually a significant price on CO2, we can ensure that industries and businesses can develop the best technologies and ways to achieve climate neutrality. And the second would be actually that energy prices also do cover and reflect investment and operating costs. So this would be really an important step to enhance also investments from the private sector, for example, in the country's renewable energy sector. I think that Deputy Minister Stavchuk has already rightly stated that energy poverty is still an important issue in Ukraine, and therefore it is key that those measures should not be at the cost of vulnerable social groups, nor should they actually have negative effects also on the competitiveness of Ukrainian businesses and industries. Therefore, there's a need, of course, for a just and a social transition and social as well as economic policies to soften the financial burden through targeted social transfers, but also transfers to businesses or industries in a way. So our joint goal should be, of course, to make the transformation processes sustainable and fair. And I think, of course, Germany will continue to support Ukraine along this road, cooperating also closely with our partners from EBRD and all other interested partners. And as already has been stated by Jan Willem, with the EBRD, we will be jointly working with our Ukrainian partners from Minecology and Minenergo in developing such a financing strategy for the enhanced NDC. And I'm very much looking forward to our continued collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a really rich round of discussion. We talked about, long-term vision building, which is actively happening in the public discourse. Talked about industrial decarbonization, newer areas of greening of the agricultural sector and forestry management. We talked about various regulations and policies that underpin these type of transitions. Clear action plans for responsibility and accountability to carry out this action. Of course, then you need finance and investments to materialize these actions, and that requires also greening of the financial system, mobilization of the private sector, and of course, within all this transition, it requires thinking about what's the impacts, overall socioeconomic impact, and just transition. So of course, I can't capture all this, very rich discussion, but I would like to. We don't have, unfortunately, time for a full round of another round of interventions. But I would like to come back, maybe perhaps for a very kind of brief remarks as to any key messages you want to leave to the audience today, or any kind of quick responses to what you've heard, in the panel discussion. So. Should I start with Deputy Minister Iryna Stavchuk?
I will say quickly that I'm sure that if we manage to put in place all the regulatory elements, and this is a hard work because it's not happening to be quickly and easy, all the ministries, the parliament, the business, we all have to work together to actually make sure that what we want to achieve is put in place.
Thank you.
I would say that Ukraine needs to modernize at least 80% of its fixed assets. That's an incredible challenge for us, but it's a great opportunity for investors because obviously industry has to become eco-friendly, and that means that this modernization will have to comply with the requirements set by the Green Deal and carbon neutrality. So for any company that wants to invest in, I think, the most progressive kind of industry and technology, I think Ukraine might become the springboard for that.
Thank you. Alessia.
So Ukraine has proved that it is Green Deal ready, and the NDC is there. It's the first step which we have already taken as a society as a whole. There is collaboration and cooperation between all the different branches, be it business, be it government, politics, civil society, and science, which is also very important. We're all in it together. And with it, we have a lot to offer to our partners, to our international partners. And the offer in place actually allows us all to do more for the environment, for combating and adapting to climate change, and for Ukraine as a country, as a democracy in Europe. So, but it will also be possible only if we unite the efforts and if we drive the investment to Ukraine and allow this investment to do the green magic it is set to do in Ukraine.
Thank you. Deputy Minister Demchenkov.
Thank you so much. I think that we shouldn't forget about our citizens, because everything that we do, this is just only for their reliable energy supply and for our citizens. And we should work to make sure that people have electricity, power, heating in their homes, and at the same time that this energy is affordable, sustainable, and clean. Remember about people, and of course everything will be okay. Ukraine is doing their job, and we really appreciate that we have support from European countries, from the US, and thank you so much for this opportunity to have such good discussion today.
Very much. Yes, Jan Willem.
I think a lot of things are a function of, let's say, the will to do it, and then implement it. And then if you show that, then you get lots of support. And EBRD would completely stand behind Ukraine's effort in this regard. So we will be with you in implementing. There are of course hard questions, and Jaroslav alluded to it. We need to make sure that the transition is just, and there is also where quite a bit of attention is being, let's say, given to, so that indeed we ensure that that society can maintain also its support for the low carbon and climate resilient transition. That's going to be very important. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I'll take my hat off as moderator and just say I echo what you said, and EBRD is definitely here to support Ukraine's NDC implementation and all these changes. And last but not least, Hannah Mosley.
Oh, it's difficult to be last because so many things have already been said, but I think that many have said it already, but if the regulatory framework is set and has been developed, even though this is not an easy task, I think this would lay out really a good basis then in the end to actually for the private sector to invest and to make this transition happening. So we are very much looking forward to, of course, stand by and support Ukraine in this task. And yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. And thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll now turn to our closing remarks. So the first remark will be given by Alexander Stavchuk. He's the lead senior, as mentioned, researcher at the Institute of Economic Forecasting, but he's also been one of the leading members in the technical support in updating the NDC. And over to you, Alexander.
Good morning, Glasgow. Good morning, COP22, and good morning, colleagues. First of all, I want to say thanks for EBRD, for government of Sweden, for UK, of course, from Germany, for supporting our process of updating NDC, and of course, many thanks for Ministry of Environment and Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine, especially for ex-Minister Abramovsky and Deputy Minister Iryna Stavchuk and other colleagues. It was thanks for the efforts of initiated and excellent implemented process of updating Ukrainian NDC. Our Institute of Ukraine is trying to support government of Ukraine systematically, and we are trying to find some ways to solve climate issues, including in Ukraine and also on global level. Just only want to say that we are using mathematical models for developed pathway of GHG emission reduction in Ukraine, and I can say that it's the first time in history, in our history, Ukraine has made long-term international commitments, a real reduction of GHG emission by 2030, and the implementation of is a necessary condition to achieve climate neutrality no later 2060. For me, this goal is quite ambitious, achievable, and importantly, leads under trajectory of global GHG emission reduction path needs to limit global warming to 1.5 degree by the end of the century. We are convinced that updated Ukrainian NDC target will be a necessary step to launch not only politically, but also for business processes of Ukraine, accession to European Green Deal and other international climate initiative and finance. And thanks again for all our partners and donors who support reforms in Ukraine, including relating with climate issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Now I will turn it over to Romeo for remarks from the NDC partnership. You've been, working in many different countries and supporting, the NDC development and its implementation. So over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for having the possibility to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation to EBRD to Ukraine, and I think I will share two observations probably, and one suggestion or one thought on how to move ahead with that. And I think there's nothing more to be done than congratulating you for this effort. It's a very, very good, ambitious, concrete, costed, whole of society kind of approach that you have been following with your NDC update. And I think that's exactly what we need. That's what also the NDC partnership stands for. So by cooperating on the national level, by bringing in international partners, I think that's exactly what the spirit is all about, and where we have exactly the support from, for instance, Germany, Sweden, the EU, and all of our members. So I think that's number one and very, very important. The second one is, I think, the linkage between your NDC and the long-term targets. Probably not analyzed so far and number crunched properly, because this is something you need to do in the future. But I think what we see is we see I think an increased motivation to really make sure that long-term strategies and NDCs are the two sides of the same coin, and we work towards bringing those together rather than doing artificial separation of both concepts, right? Which we sometimes feel a little bit on the international scene. So that's a very important one. And you mentioned the net zero target, but also the Ukraine 2050 green energy transition, extremely important, I think, to count this in and make sure that you show this also the world, how this linkage is actually happening. And the third is, and MP Vasilenko was putting this very, to the point, I think, is on partnerships. And I think that the partnership with businesses, with civil society, with various ministries in the country, finance, super crucial, of course, always is a very important one. And then the NDC partnership, as we know it from our other countries, we work in 65 countries. We've been supporting through our climate action enhancement package on NDC improvements. The point is really how to get the answers right, and how to make sure that the implementation is then also following after the NDC enhancement is actually done. And I think that's a very important one. Making sure that the national coordination and national partnerships are then linked with the international response. And there also we cannot afford to do things in parallel. We need the full instruments that we have, all kinds of grant mechanisms. Jan Willem mentioned, grant elements for leveraging concessional finance. All these kind of things need to come together, and that's the suggestion I have. Let's work together on this. We stand ready, but if you allow the NDC partnership with all its partners can try to make this implementation work in the spirit of our slogan, together we can achieve more. And I think with that, I once again congratulate you very much for this effort, and hope to work together in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It has been a really, rich and quite meaningful, actually, because I've been involved in this project for over 2 years now, and having this moment is quite, quite an achievement. And I really, again, echo the congratulations on, coming this far. It's, very meaningful milestones. But of course, we need to really, take this momentum and really start implementing, taking actions. It's already happening. Of course, it's challenging. But it's important to have that long-term vision there, linking up with the long-term targets, setting short, medium-term milestones, and then working together in partnership with not only international partners, but also local partners like the research community, and really make use out of the knowledge and experiences that are generated throughout this process, and really make the effort and achieve the true green transition of Ukraine. So I really wish Ukraine the best of luck, and we'll be here to support you as well. So with that said, I would like to also mention that there are reports on the Ministry of Environment's website, that technical reports that have supported the whole process. So if, for those of you who are interested, please go and have a read. And I would like to thank all the panelists and speakers today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you another time. Thank you very much.